Hi everyone, and welcome to the Australian Accessibility Conference. My name is Brooke Jamieson and I'm the Experience Lead at PlaceOS. Before I get started with the presentation today, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm broadcasting from today. So I'm broadcasting from Jamieson of Brisbane, and the traditional owners are the Yagara and Turrbal nations. And I would like to acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging. Welcome to Automation for Inclusion: how to design smart spaces that are inclusive spaces. At their core, smart spaces are all about connecting people to place with technology. However, like all technology, smart spaces aren't always accessible by design. This is a new industry working with new technology that can present new challenges. However, it also brings new opportunities to make spaces accessible in ways that simply weren't possible before. In this talk, I'll present a workflow to champion human-centered design within tech, to ensure that the technology within the built environment doesn't ignore the diverse humans who occupy that environment. With a background in formal mathematics and professional experience in tech and user experience, I've witnessed automation being used for exclusion and not inclusion too many times. This talk will unpack the inherent problems with technology automation solutions and the solutions I've designed and crafted to solve these problems. So let's get started. So what is a smart space anyway? Well, I am Experience Lead at PlaceOS, which is a smart building and smart workplace technology platform. Essentially, it's like the operating system for a building. So anyone that has been in a modern building will know there's all sorts of technology within the space, and that can include things from video conferencing through to elevators, lights, heating and cooling and ventilation, as well as all sorts of cameras and sensors, all the tech that's in a building. Essentially, what we can do is get that tied together on a really good digital foundation, and then we can layer on different digital experiences powered by automation and other sorts of triggers on top of that. And so overall, the goal is to connect people to place with technology, which sounds easy, but it's really not. Because lots of this technology it works really well on its own. So maybe the lifts are really good at being lifts and just great. However, if you wanted to tie any of that together, so maybe you wanted people to get out of the lift at a specific floor because that's where their meeting room is booked and you want to give them access through to that, that gets really difficult when you start to tie things together. So a lot of what we do is getting all of these systems to talk with each other when they're really not built to do that a lot of the time. And this is something that's really difficult. Anyone with smart home systems will be really familiar that it's actually quite easy to get Google or Alexa or your platform of choice to set it up so that the lights turn on for your home when you either arrive in your street or within a certain radius of your home when you come home in the afternoon. That's quite easy and doable. However, this is an issue for commercial spaces when you're dealing with commercial grade equipment and security and all of the layers that come along with that, and scaling it up to the buildings that we work with at PlaceOS. So we can work through multinational corporations with big precincts or just single tenancies, or maybe it's just one tenancy within a building. There's really a lot of moving pieces that make it quite a lot harder than just setting up Google Home for your residential, just single unit. That's a lot easier than what it actually is in practice for commercial spaces. And this is really important because this is essentially what PlaceOS does. So something that seems like on the surface would be easy is actually behind the scenes not so easy if you don't have the right pieces moving together with you. So it's really like herding cats in a way. Someone said this in an interview with my boss, and I've definitely taken it and run with it. So it's not because you're just trying to coordinate all of these moving pieces of technology within a space, but it gets really difficult because you're dealing with so many people, and not just the number of people, but from diverse backgrounds or diverse roles. And everyone needs to come together to make decisions because there are a lot of decisions to be made. So when we are scoping a project at the start, we could have someone from workplace facilities, if this is a workplace scenario. So we could have someone from workplace facilities who's just really monitoring the facilities and how the physical workspace is used. We would have someone from IT. We would also have someone from HR or people in culture. And we would also have usually someone from finance or the CFO, depending on what sort of solution is happening. And there's just so many different pieces of the puzzle technically, but also with the people in the process that will come together to make the solution. And now that's what makes the solutions really good in the end when they're done well. That's just because everyone can really work together towards a common goal to get to a common solution. But in practice, that's really, really difficult because there's so many pieces of the puzzle coming together. And so my background's in formal mathematics, and I am not a designer. I don't have any UX training really at uni. All of my training has been in mathematics. However, at its core, mathematics is creative problem solving. And I think that's why I've always attacked this a little bit differently. And I've always sort of brought different things to the table just because that's what I'm used to. So I'm really just, my brain has been trained to look at a really complex system and work out how I can break that down into smaller, more achievable pieces to solve, or how I can optimize different parts of that puzzle, or how I can just find a really creative solution to what is a difficult problem to solve. So that's the lens that I look at design through, rather than someone who has learnt design from scratch. And I think that's why I'm just a bit different when I approach this stuff, but I think that's as well why my ideas in this space will be useful regardless of the background you're in, because lots of this stuff can be applied to so many different industries or lots of different problems you're trying to solve. And one of the other talks, or the topics that I talk about a lot, is how people can make their voices heard. So specifically for how you can persuasively present your results. And this is because as someone who has always worked in male-dominated industries, earlier in my career, I got really frustrated a lot of the time because I would work really hard to get results and then I couldn't explain them to anyone. And it was really, really frustrating because no one would hear me and I couldn't make my voice heard. And this is a different application of that. So instead of having results that we would like to share with everyone to present, this is different because we've got ideas, and ideas are often a lot harder to sell. So we've got ideas that we need people to understand because maybe you've got a really good idea for the space or how the tech will work within the space to make things more accessible. But you've also got priorities. And I think a lot of the audience today would be struggling with the idea of how do I get everyone else involved in the project to care about the things that I care about and it's my job to care about. And I think that is something that is just super applicable to everyone that will be here today and in so many different industries. And I know I will be talking about smart workplaces or tech and things like that. If that's not relevant to you, that's fine. But still, I would say take away from this what you find useful, because there will be a lot of ways of how you can get buy-in for ideas, which is actually really difficult. And I don't think it's talked about enough. I am definitely not the authority on the laws in accessibility or things like that. I apply with them and I work within them, but I think there are better people to talk on that. However, one of the things that I find with accessibility is there's lots of really good resources for things that you can do or strategies that you can do to make something accessible. I think especially within app design and web design, the frameworks are really well set out and documented. However, what's difficult and what I don't think is explained very well, or it's really hard to learn at the start at least, is how to get other people to care about those frameworks. Because it's one thing that the frameworks exist, but it's a whole other piece of the puzzle that people will use the frameworks and operate within them now and into the future. And how can you actually get people to care about something now and then as a sustainable movement moving forward? And that's what I will be focusing on at the core today. I know it's called automation for inclusion, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of problems that a lot of people would face in different sorts of organizations and businesses where there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of people making a lot of decisions. And so much of this is about how can we help people stay on priority for what is really important for all of the users at the end of the day, but also within the strategy and the values of the organization. So this slide says talk with people and not talk at them. And this is actually from one of my other slide decks when I talk about data analysis, because that's something I present on a lot. And I think good data visualization and analysis is a conversation, not you talking at someone. So I always say talk with people to find the questions and talk with data to find the answers. And then it should be an ongoing conversation as part of that. And that really is one of the key parts of the framework for this sort of design and decision making, because it's about having an ongoing conversation with all of the information that you have. One of the things that I always say is be data-driven and not data-derailed. And this feeling of being derailed because the data is taking you in a different direction, or there's just a constant, what about this and what about that? data-driven decisions mean you should make a decision, and design means you should be designing for a solution in mind. So definitely make sure you're taking into account everyone's perspectives along the way, and make sure if someone's voice needs to be heard, work out how you can help them make that voice heard, or how you can help get buy-in from other people. But definitely also have in mind the direction that you are trying to go into and how you can eventually end up at a result. There's so many different things that will be happening, and you will find the entire process so much easier if you're guided by some values, principles, and different sorts of frameworks that you can use to navigate this, because it is a long journey. Lots of our design processes do take quite a while between whether it's a retrofit or if it's a new construction building, because there's so many different people or organizations that we would be working with along the way, and different sorts of consultants and things like that. It does come down to a really long time, and the only way you will get a consistent vision across that is if you're driven by the same principles for that whole time. And I think that's really important as part of this, and as part of accessibility discussions in general, because you need to find a way to link your accessibility goals and frameworks and minimum standards through to the ongoing values of the project that you're working on, regardless of what form that project might take. And the next slide is something as well that I come back to. So there's some key ideas at the start, and then we will get into some more specific things, but lots of this is the motivation through how I attack decisions and things like that. So are you running from something or running to something? This is a really key way to guide your values and principles when you are looking to make some larger decisions. So I talk about this a lot with regards to diversity and inclusion in tech. So lots of organizations they'll want to start a diversity program or document or something like that, just because they want to run away from being told that they are homophobic or racist or whatever it might be. They just want to run away from the bad word. They're not running to something. So the idea of running to something in that scenario would be, I want to create a workplace where everyone's voice is heard and everyone feels valued. That's the idea of running to something. And I think the same thing can happen with accessible design. So are you running away from, we don't want to be inaccessible, running away from, we don't want to be caught up in any of the legislation or the frameworks that you're going with? Or do you want to run towards something, I want my building to be the place that all of its inhabitants feel welcome and valued, or I want everyone to be able to use everything in this building. What sort of place are you creating? And be open and honest about what is actually the case there. Work out whether you're running from something or running to something, and then definitely keep that as a guiding principle throughout the process, because that will really help keep you grounded and centered when a lot of things start to feel like they're moving around, is orbiting around you. There's so many different moving pieces. And the one way to really stay focused on that end goal and stay focused on the solution you have in mind is be really clear about not only the solution that you have in mind and the end goal, but all of the values that help you to get there. I always think about in my mind like climbing through monkey bars and just linking them through that way. You're on a path. Each part is a little bit difficult, but just stay guided by the values and the vision that you had overall. And this will help you to verbalize that vision or communicate it in different ways so that you can stay communicating well. And I think that's one thing when you're having all of your meetings in person, but especially now that a lot of our communication is happening online, like today, it's really more so important, because people will pay even less attention than they did when they were in person. So anything you can do to maintain a consistent source of truth and continuity will help everyone understand your message and then also champion it themselves. So my next slide says, are your constraints a source of stress or inspiration? And this also comes back to mathematics as well. A lot of what we did, we would be trying to find a maximum of a function. So maybe there's a surface, which I'll pop one up on the screen, but essentially it will just look sort of like a handkerchief, I guess, dangling in space. And there might be one part that looks like it's high, which is a local maxima, but there's actually a global maxima, which is quite a lot higher than it. So there's all sorts of constraints. And when you're trying to optimize something, so maybe you're trying to find the highest point in something, do the constraints help you get to that solution? Do they help you find new solutions? Do they help you find new ways of solving the problem? Or are you just really stressed about them? And that is definitely one of the things from maths that I bring into any creative work I do as well, just because that is, in my opinion, it helps you so much to find new creative ways to solve solutions. Anyone that has ever cooked for anyone with dietary conditions will understand this. It forces you to be more creative, and it forces you to find new things that maybe you didn't do before because that's not how you eat, but having constraints really helps you to unlock new creativity, and there are papers in this space. So this paper is called Designing the Solution, Impact of Constraints on Consumers' Creativity. I will provide a link in show notes. But overall, it does prove this. So it shows that when there was consumers, they were making different decisions, and having a certain number of constraints did help them get to a decision. And I think it's really easy to assume that accessibility is just a set of rules of things you can't do. But I think all of the different accessibility frameworks that exist, especially for digital products and also in the physical environment, really help you to get to a solution that will be good for everyone in your building. And I think having the framework in your mind of, I will design something great not in spite of them, but taking all of these solutions in, rather than I will just make the design I want and then cut off all the bits that fail the test. Think of it instead as, how can you still find a way to win, or how can I incorporate all of these ideas and get to somewhere positive, compared to everything is against me and I have to cut off parts of my design that I didn't want to. So really change your mindset when it comes to accessibility, and it will help you to get to better solutions in the end. So when I'm talking about different values that can guide you through the process, one of the key ones to come back to is thinking about what success means to you. So what are the goalposts that you're going to? How will you know you've done a good job? How will you feel like whatever project it is, whether that's a smart building, smart workplace, or whatever it is that you're designing, what does it mean to be successful? I think when you talk to just a specific person about this, you can understand so much about their values and their interests, whether they say, oh, I would like to own a mansion and 10 Lamborghinis, or I would like to own my house with 10 dogs. You can learn so much about what it actually means to be successful. So think about that within the case of your project as well. So how will you know when you've done a good job with your project? And under that same idea, think about, what does function mean? So when something is functional, what does it mean to be functional? What are the minimum standards or criteria? Is it that everyone should be able to use something in the building, or 60% or 90%? Or what are the goalposts you're going to set for yourself? And be really open and upfront about those at the start of the project, and then you can always refer back to them and say, is this in line with what we had envisioned? If not, why not? How can we help get there? How can we find a way to win? What can we change now that will help that come together? So these are two really good questions to have in your mind before anything starts, and then to refer back to, because especially if you're working over a really long project, maybe this will change for you. That's fine. Just still be upfront about it. There's no point hiding your answers to these, because this will really help unite you as a team towards a common goal. And so one of the things that I have made is, I always found that I was getting absolutely steamrolled in design conversations when I started. And I think that was just because I wasn't really ready for what people would necessarily be doing, or I really didn't know how to navigate the conversations and to help people understand my point of view and my priorities and why they were specifically important for the project. And I think that would happen a lot within accessibility in general. I think it happens in every industry, but it's always something to think about when you maybe have priorities that are not reflected in the rest of the group. So what I did is I was going through and auditing user experience design that had been done by someone else for a project that I did. And then so what I ended up doing as part of designing an audit process, because lucky me, I didn't study design, so I didn't know if there were any audit processes. I just made my own. And this is part of it. So it's an axis model. There's 4 squares, and sort of just into lots of 2. So there's 4 boxes on the screen, and the first 2 that we'll be looking at are remove negative and add value. So what happens is, for each feature of, in this case, smart building experience could be anything for you, but for each idea or feature that someone brings up, think about whether it's something that is removing a negative experience or adding value. A really good example that I always come back to for removing negative is maybe someone had to do something in Excel constantly that was just this menial task that they hated doing. It is an overall positive experience to just remove that so they don't have to do it. There's a lot of things like that that can be automated really quickly, or maybe there's just an easier way to input that data if that's what they're trying to do or something they're trying to achieve. Or maybe as part of a booking process, they previously had to email 6 different people and now we can automate it so they have to only do that once or none at all. So think about what are the negative experiences, things that grind people's gears, what can you remove? And it's positive just if you think of something negative and then you bring that up to 0, that will improve the experience overall. And that is the case for so many accessibility things. So maybe there's something either in the physical or the digital design that is currently not accessible. That is a negative. So it's overall good for the user experience journey if that's just removed. The add value is the sort of golden child of this, because what happens is everyone wants to talk about the really shiny sizzle features that are the things that they will get good press about, or maybe the things that they'll be able to talk about in some sort of review, but they'll sound really good. And often the features that add value get a lot of airtime in meetings and discussions because they're super exciting, but it's not necessarily helping the design at all. So that's the whole thing of this diagram, is if we can think about the ideas people are having and segment them into these 4 areas, that way we can have more evenly dispersed conversations about each section of it, because there are sections of this that will get a lot of airtime, will take up a lot of real estate in meetings and discussions, just because they're more exciting and they sound better, and that often doesn't actually lead to a better solution overall. So think of this as just it's a framework to keep things on track and to stop your good ideas getting steamrolled, essentially. So the next axis has 2 boxes, one for function and one for form. Anyone who has ever been in a design meeting of any kind will understand this. So one of the problems with design is that it's really hard to explain to people what functional design is sometimes. People get really excited about form. Or the other thing is maybe the functional design is actually really good, but the form, so how something looks or feels, isn't good, and people just say no to the whole thing rather than thinking, oh, they can just change the form of it. So anything that's regarding what color will the slider bar be, or what shape icon should this be, those are all form decisions usually, but function things are, is our product functional? Is it accessible? What is the experience we're actually trying to give users? How does this actually work? Does the thing do what we say it will do? Those are all function decisions. And at the end of the day, the function side of things need to be absolutely nailed in and absolutely working before you even think about adding form, because the problem is that, first of all, having form discussions will often remove your functional abilities. So if you get really locked into a certain layout on a page, that might remove the ability to have functions later on, or it might remove your ability to add further functions in future. So keeping those separate, really just keep them separate and do function first. And then the good thing is once you've designed function and you know specifically what it will do functionally, you can design a form for that that's specifically suited to what you've built. You won't ever get to the point where you do a great visual design for something that has to be thrown out because it's not functional, and then you're double handling it and you'll have to do it again. So when we look at this together, it really brings it back in a way. So we've got remove negative and add value vertically, and then we've got function and form. Sometimes I might do this with different colored Post-its, or if it's online, I'll just put them in different colored boxes. But when people have ideas, it's really important to work out where they fit on this diagram and make sure that you're not taking up all of the time in all of your conversations, especially your early conversations, on form and add value. Lots of the things that are remove negative are honestly easy wins, and they're really good things to prioritize early on, because you will get further opportunities to add value in future if you've just gotten rid of the things that were actively bad for so many people. And the same thing with function. Once you've really understood the function and you've got all of those decisions made, you can layer on form that will only help to enhance that. They'll never be fighting. So overall, this is what I use to help design smart buildings and smart workplaces. But I think this is a model that will be really helpful to people trying to get accessible designs or accessible concepts through in a lot of ways, because it just stops the cool guys, so add value and form, from taking up all of the time. Because at its core, accessibility is about removing the negative. So it's about someone can't do something or someone isn't able to use something because of how it's currently designed, and removing that. So it just goes to a neutral, if anything. Having something at neutral is a net positive, and then you can always add value by improving that in future, but you won't be able to add that extra bit to add value if you haven't gotten everything up to a neutral standpoint to start with. And form also comes into, accessibility also comes into the function side of things and not form. I think that's why it's really hard to have visual design discussions when people don't really understand the concept of accessibility, because maybe they'll say, oh, the button doesn't look as nice when the contrast is that high. But that's that's the point of the button, is that someone can use the button. That's why it's on the page. So the whole idea is that it's functional, and that really comes into functional discussions and decisions rather than form. Form can act within the framework that functions set out, but it will help to embrace it and bring everything together. So I really hope this helps you to help make better decisions as companies and as organizations. This is definitely what I use. Once again, I'm not actually trained in design or in accessibility. I've done a lot of my own research, but this is what I found through a lot of practice and experience in helping to guide conversations in a constructive way. I will be sticking around for questions, but if you don't want to ask a question here or you think of something in future, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I will leave my name or my QR code somewhere on the screen for you to scan. And I will see you next time. Thanks so much.